Thanks for coming out to Option. Very nice to see all you here. We're very excited to have William Winant here. He's going to perform a piece by Roscoe Mitchell called For the South Side, and also a piece by James Tenney called Having Never Written a Note for Percussion. And I should let you all know that that piece, which is written for tam-tam, is going to get quite loud. So no screaming when it gets loud, but because it is going to be pretty loud. Just want to let you know that. So after the performance, we're going to take a short break, and then I'm going to interview William for the second set. So definitely stay for both sets if you can. And that's all I'm going to say. So without further ado, please put your hands together for William Winant.
This piece is by Roscoe Mitchell in honor of the 50th anniversary of the Art Ensemble of Chicago. And the piece is actually called Bells for New Orleans. And it's in 3 movements: chimes, bells, and then back to chimes.
it was very close to a wall, and so I think that was like, yeah, it's like the sound's bouncing off and amplified. But there was a, I think there was a CD of it where I tried to get it, but like by the time I tried to buy it, it was sold out already. It's 4 different performances of the piece, and each one in a different environment.
sit on that one if you want.
This is good. Right.
So how about another round of applause for William Winant? Hopefully the clapping will, other people who are out there getting drinks will hear this and they will heed the call and come into the room. I'll let a few more people waltz in before I start the interview. I do want to say a huge thank you to Chicago Percussion Rental for getting these wonderful instruments here, so that was very helpful. If you all ever need percussion instruments, go to Chicago Percussion Rental. Even if you don't need percussion instruments, go to Chicago Percussion Rental. Absolutely. Okay, I think we're going to start. So first of all, thank you. It's really nice to have you here. And is it correct that this is the first time you've performed solo in Chicago?
Mm-hmm. I think I take it back. I played this Ravinia Music Festival with this composer, Frederick Chevsky.
Sure.
And I performed his Flower Pot piece, To
Okay.
the Earth.
Okay.
But that was just one piece. But
Okay.
I did do a
So
little
this is
solo
your
there.
first solo
Yeah, without.
performance without. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. So you're a musician who's comfortable working in multiple genres of sound. Contemporary classical music, noise rock, free improvisation, jazz. You do a lot of things. Did you start out with this curiosity in all these different styles of music, or were you rooted more in were you classically trained and then eventually branched
started
out?
off like listening to pop music and rock
Mhm.
music, and then kind of interested in blues music, actually Chicago style blues, for a long time. And then I kind of then started listening to, in high school, getting into improvisational types of music, especially groups from here that were connected with the AACM, Art Ensemble of Chicago, Sun Ra, people like that. That's kind of how it was through sort of free jazz that I got into contemporary music.
Okay. All right. So it's always been an element of improvisation.
Yeah, I
connected
started
to-
as an improviser.
You started as an improviser. That's really great because it is rare. I mean, maybe it's becoming less rare, but I see, and maybe this is a question for you. I'm seeing more classically trained musicians becoming really strong improvisers
Mhm.
than historically. I think it's becoming something that's happening more. Do you see that as well? As someone who's been doing this for 40 years.
Yeah, no, everybody, now it's like, when I started, it was like very few people were doing both things, and now most of the young cats are good at doing everything.
Yeah, and I think they help each other out. I think
Yeah.
you become a better reader, become a better interpreter of classical works through composed
Right.
works, being a
Well,
strong
I felt like
improviser.
there was some sort of connection in the ether. I didn't see that much difference between certain, between like a Boulez piece and maybe an Archie Shepp On This Night type of thing, or
Yeah, right.
or certain Stockhausen pieces would remind me of certain, like some of the music of Cecil Taylor. There was just like this thing in the air
Yeah, for sure.
in terms of everybody was sort of, doing, like, interested in similar sonic possibilities.
Edgar Varèse's piece, Ionization, for all percussion, when I first heard that, I thought it was improvised. I had no idea. It sounded...
Well, like when I was a kid, I'd go to the record stores, and I was avid, any kind of music, and I sometimes would just like buy records because of the names and things like, Archie Shepp, Pharoah Saunders, Sun Ra, all those names, like were, just the names interested me because, what
Totally.
does Sun Ra sound like?
Yeah, totally.
Like
Pharaoh Sanders.
Like,
Wow.
that's
He's
gotta
a
be
pharaoh?
That's got to be pretty hip.
Wow, we have a pharaoh
and
in the 20th century?
and then I see a record like I saw this Boulez record once when I was in high school. It said Improvisation Sir Malamar, so I thought it was improvised music, and I listened to it, and it was kind of like in a way it was kind of the way I like to improvise, and then somebody told me, oh, that's all written out. And
Wow.
so then that's how I sort of wanted to get into learning how to play that music.
Yeah, yeah. So you were born in Brooklyn, correct?
Yeah.
But you didn't grow up in New York.
I moved to Hollywood like when I was 3.
Okay. How did you find percussion? How was that? What was your musical household, or was there
No. I completely came from a non-musical household.
Interesting.
But as young, I started getting into it by, as I said, listening to people like Mitch Mitchell or Ginger Baker, and then people like Sam Belo and Francis Sam Lay, Buddy Miles, people like that. Blues drummers, Mick Fleetwood, and then from there to jazz drummers,
Fantastic.
and then I would hear people like Barry Altschul, who had a huge setup. It wasn't just drum set; it was like all kinds of percussion, and I realized, and I would see pieces like by Stockhausen or people that also used similar, huge percussion setups,
Yeah.
and exploring colors and things like that. So it all seemed like a natural progression.
Was there any memorable, I don't know, experience, or particularly maybe a live concert that kind of set you on the path to want to devote your life to doing this?
Yeah,
I mean, there must have been multiple, but was there any in particular like that really stand out?
the first time I saw Chick Corea,
Okay.
he had a band called Circle with Anthony Braxton, Barry Altschul, and Dave Holland. And when I first saw them, they were completely playing free, no charts. They didn't play tunes. They just completely played free. And it was the first time I ever saw a kind of virtuoso saxophonist. Braxton, was, this would have been 69 or 68. He was like at his top of his form. And I have to say that was like that seeing that at the Lighthouse. And I was too young to even go in. I saw it through the window. And,
Wow. Yeah.
And it totally changed my life forever.
Yeah. I mean, hearing this live really, I think is really key. Absolutely. Well, you went to California Institute of the Arts.
Mm-hmm.
Is that where you met James Tenney?
Mm-hmm.
So James Tenney was the composer who performed the second piece that William played tonight. Can you maybe talk a little bit about your experience working with James Tenney? What did you study with him? I'm sure a lot of things, but anything in particular
When I
that you
first went to
absorbed?
Cal Arts, I was mainly studying contemporary classical music. And Jim had a group out there called Tone Roads.
Mm-hmm.
And, he conducted a percussion concert of music of Cage and Lou Harrison and Edgar Varese and Henry Cowell. And so I started working with Jim as a conductor.
Oh, interesting.
And then also I started to play his music. And then I moved to Toronto and finished school at York. And Jim moved there. I ended up being his roommate.
Oh, wow.
And so I ended up working with Jim quite a bit.
How
And
was
he
he
was
as
the
a
one that
roommate?
really encouraged me to start.
Is he the reason they're laughing? Because I asked, how is he as a roommate? Is he okay? Was he okay as a roommate?
I mean, was I okay as a roommate?
Oh, wait. So you finished at York, but James came with you?
I
to
basically got kicked out of Cal Arts. I mean, I was going, but I wasn't taking the proper classes to graduate. And then after a while, I stopped paying tuition. And I was just playing in the percussion ensemble. And eventually,
So they kicked you out for not
they
paying
said that I
tuition?
was on, I got called into the office and they said I was on private property and I owed them all this money. And so that was that. And then I kind of joined the band. I joined like a band at that time. It was,
You joined Oingo Boingo, right?
Oingo Boingo.
Cool.
And so I dropped out of college to be in this band for a while.
Cool. Awesome.
And they were also interested in the same kind of things I was interested in at the time. Everything from like world music to Duke Ellington to Stefan Grappelli to Albert Eiler to Prokofiev.
Sure. Wow. A lot of influences. And were you playing drum set with them or percussion?
At that time,
both?
I was the
Doing
drummer.
drum set? Very cool. Excellent. I wouldn't mind for a minute talking about your relationship with Roscoe Mitchell. This piece that you performed tonight that was really beautiful. You also performed it at the MCA in 2015.
There was an exhibition at that museum of, I guess, of art from things going on in the '60s from that period, And one of the things, they did a whole 2 days of stuff of Roscoe Mitchell's. And so Roscoe put together I'd been playing with Roscoe already for a while. And Roscoe put together a band with like Tyshawn Sorey and Craig Taborn, myself, Hugh Ranglin, I guess, Tani Tabal. And it was like a large band, and we did 2 kinds of concerts. One concert on his percussion setup that he used to use in the art ensemble, and then another concert of new pieces that he was writing for this thing. And that's where the Bells for the South Side came out. We made a record. We also made a record there as well for ECM.
Now, this piece that you played tonight, did you perform this exact piece in a trio setting? Or
No,
okay.
This piece is different. This is Bells for New Orleans.
Bells for New Orleans.
So this was kind of written after the hurricane.
Got it. Okay.
So sort of in honor, it was in recognition of that.
Katrina.
And I recorded this. This was the first thing I recorded for Roscoe on a Rogue Art.
Oh,
But when we came here, all the music was this music for the Bells for the South Side.
Got it.
So it was all more related to his experiences here in Chicago.
So I misspoke earlier. I announced this piece as Bells for the South Side. This is
Right.
Bells
This is Bells for New Orleans.
for New Orleans. Sorry about that. Okay.
But this piece was written for me.
Excellent. I also saw that you recorded a large group piece with Roscoe at Mills.
Last year we recorded, he's been doing a really interesting thing where he was playing in a trio with Craig Taborn and this drummer from England. It was a trio, I can't remember the name of the drummer. And they were improvisations. And then what he did was he had the improvisations transcribed. And then from the transcription of those improvisations, he then orchestrated them for an orchestra.
Wow. Okay.
So it was a really interesting way of working.
Now he was conducting. Was he also
No,
performing?
Roscoe was playing. There was another conductor
Okay.
in the ensemble, but he brought in people like myself and some other people. Besides all the written material, there were areas to improvise in.
Okay. How large was the ensemble, roughly?
23 instruments.
23. Wow. And that all got recorded, and that recording is available.
That recording it just came out.
Just came out, and it's is a Roscoe Mitchell's?
Yeah. And then we did a year before that. We did another orchestra recording of the same idea, taking transcriptions of this trio with Craig Taborn, Roscoe, and a drummer from England whose name I can't remember. But he actually played on that. When we played at MCA, that drummer came out. So there was actually 4 drummers. There was me, Tyshawn, the drummer from England, and Tani Tabal.
Wow. Fantastic. Moving on, you're really well known for the realization of other people's works, but you haven't really composed your own stuff so much.
No, I'm not a composer at all.
Why not? What is it?
That's my name.
Just
Why not? Or you can call me
That's what I'm saying. Why not? Do you need another beer? I was asking you another
Guillermo,
question.
por qué no? No, I mean, I think just playing music was hard enough for me.
Well, you don't make it sound
And then composing just seemed like a whole other thing that I'd leave that up to, to them. I thought composing was like a sacred area that I didn't want to get involved in. I liked being the muse.
Yeah, okay. Any influences outside of the world of sound, for example, visual art, sculpture, painting?
People like Philip Guston,
Yep,
and
absolutely.
Rothko, Rauschenberg, a lot of those guys. I loved a lot of that art, and a lot of the composers I worked with, like people like Earl Brown, who was into Calder. Feldman was into Guston and to
Absolutely.
Rothko. Cage was into all kinds of things. Feldman was also into rugs. So, for me when I was learning their music and working with those composers, it was important to know the artwork that was influencing them, because they were more influenced by what was going on in the art world than they were sometimes even in the music world.
Big time. In fact, I was reading a Feldman book, and he talks about that the only audience for their concerts were painters and dancers, like in the early days.
Well, a lot of times, like back in the 70s, like when I played with Steve Reich, we played in art galleries. We didn't play in normal music venues.
Yeah, right. Fantastic. Maybe 1 or 2 more questions, and I'll open it up to the audience, see if they have any questions. But I wanted to ask you a question about the Bay Area, and I wanted to ask you how you feel it's changed since you first moved there, to now, and as someone who's also teaches at Mills College, would you tell your students now that it's a creative place to try to build something now? Because, I mean, last time I was there, I love the city, but it seems to be getting so outrageously expensive out there. How does one move to a city like that and try to...
I think people, if they're dedicated enough, and you want to somehow be an artist, whether it's, visual, music, that you make it happen somehow,
you
even
figure
if
it
you're
out.
doing it against gigantic odds. I mean, it's always been like that.
Yeah.
So, it's just, for me, it's like it's still a creative scene. There's still people figure out places to play. There's there's definitely ways of
making it work.
Making it work. You just have to, figure it out.
All right.
But I don't discourage them at all. If that's, for me, I've been all over the world. I still get home, I still want to go back
Yeah, right.
to California.
Yeah.
Jump in that ocean, right? Like maybe tomorrow.
Well, you should really spend a winter in Chicago. I think you'll really become attached to this city.
I like winters. I lived in
Then
Toronto
that's
for
why
5
I'm
years.
saying you should. What's coming up next? What do you do when you head back home
At the end of
tomorrow?
next week, I'm in an Italian pop music band with this singer named Mike Patton, who's was mainly a rock singer. I think he plays in a band called Faith No More, and I was in a band with him for 10 years called Mr. Bungle.
Right.
And he now has an Italian pop music project with 12 musicians and then a 12-piece orchestra.
Great.
So we're going to Italy to do Italian pop music next week.
Fantastic. Wonderful. Any questions from the audience for William? Yes.
I have a two-parter. Early on in the interview, you mentioned a composed record by someone named
Boulez, Pierre Boulez, who's a French composer
Okay.
that came sort of out of that Schoenberg school of music, the 12-tone. He became like a very important figure in European avant-garde new music. And he did this big orchestra piece called Plis on Plis. Within it, there were 2 short movements called Improvisations sur Mallarmé after the poet. And, his music was totally written out, but when you listen to his music, like the Marteau, Sens Matre and stuff like that, it to me does sound spontaneous. It almost sounds improvised.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And so he was doing something that when I was in high school caught my ear. And then when I saw that it was all composed, I was like, that even interested me more.
Interesting. Very cool. Was there a second part to the?
So you had said that record sounded like the way you like to improvise.
Yeah.
And as someone who really adores the way you improvise, could you? It's hard to put into words and almost an impossible question, but what is the way you like to improvise?
Well, I'm kind of into sound, I kind of into timbre, into sound, as just sound, and the way it's organized and orchestrated in terms of timbre is very important to me. And I think that both people in the improvised music world and people coming out of the new music world were also very interested in just pure sound and the way it could be organized in different ways. And but as a kid, I was really totally taken by improvised music. And then I would buy a record like, I don't know if you know Archie Shepp's On This Night,
Mm-hmm.
but the first piece on that record was with a soprano, and it's pretty much a through composed piece, and he's using sort of an atonal 12-tone language. So I was always interested in music that was kind of pointillistic, maybe didn't have a tonal center, that sometimes didn't have like a recurring rhythm or a steady pulse. And I felt I found that in both I could find that the kind of music, whether I was listening to Cecil Taylor or Archie Shepp or like the early Circle records, as
Sure.
well as I could find that similar idea of abstract expressionism in sound with people like John Cage or Mort Feldman.
Absolutely.
Even though they were coming completely different backgrounds.
No, absolutely. And what's really exciting to me is I was introduced to the work of Anthony Braxton, great American composer, multi-reedist, visionary from Chicago.
From Chicago.
And I heard Webern later, but after exploring the works of Webern, I heard some of his ideas in Braxton's music.
Right.
So
Well,
this
I mean,
is this cross.
Again, I got to know Braxton really well. The great thing for me was being connected with Mills College, I got to meet a lot of my heroes that when I was in high school, I thought I would never get to play with Anthony Braxton. I would never get to work with Roscoe Mitchell or Cecil Taylor, and I ended up getting to work with those people later
Fantastic.
on.
Yeah.
But like Braxton, you talk to him, like one of his favorite composers is Stockhausen,
Correct.
and
Absolutely.
he was always into Stockhausen, as much as he was into Charlie Parker. I mean, they were both important figures for him.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So for me, it was all about sound, about music, and about this
About
thing.
ideas, really.
And it seemed like everybody was sort of in some weird way on the same page. I don't
Yeah.
know why I thought that, but as I said, also, I just would buy records, without knowing what I was going to get, and it would be sometimes just like, as the Boulez record had the word improvisation in it, so that's why I bought that record. I mean, I bought, as I said, Archie Shepp records just because I thought Archie Shepp was the coolest name ever.
It's one of the cool. I mean, maybe Thelonious Monk is a cool.
Thelonious
name,
Monk,
but
another
that's,
incredible
they're
name.
both. But I would find.
I thought
jazz
these guys had
records.
like a publicist or something like that. You couldn't come up with a better name and music or better music.
Pretty much. Any other questions for William? Yes.
Yes, I would like you to talk a little bit about your collaboration with pianist Chris Brown, how it came about and what it has brought to you as a musician.
Chris Brown, I was introduced to Chris Brown by this reed player named Peter Kuhn, who was living on the West, had been living in New York and had worked with a lot of free improvisers. And he knew Chris from Santa Cruz, UC Santa Cruz, the university there. And he hooked me up like in 1981 with Chris doing an improv. And at that time, Chris was really into building these electroacoustic instruments. But he was also totally into improvising. So it was through Peter that I first met Peter, and we started improvising together. And then Larry Oakes had seen me work. I'd been touring with a composer named Iannis Xenakis, like in 1981 or 82. Larry Oakes from the Rover Saxophone Quartet saw me play, and then he wanted to do something with me because he was interested in that. And I suggested that, well, maybe if we form this group, let's get Chris, because he was into making his own electronics, writing his own software, building his own instruments, and also was a killer improviser on the as a piano player. And so,
Absolutely.
so we formed this little group called Room, and then later on we got hooked up with Glenn Spearman, and we had a double trio. So I bet Chris is I've been working with Chris since 1981. And we even played here a few years ago at the Constellation with a German saxophonist named Frank Gretkowski.
Oh, right. Yep. Very cool. Any other questions?
Just wondering if you ever look for unique acoustic spaces, and do they inspire you, the sound of the space? And I guess I'm asking that because, like in San Francisco, on the other side of the Golden Gate Bridge, there's the hills overlooking the Pacific. They have these old,
Like missile silos and things like that.
The war,
They built these, during World War II, they built like all these bunkers and stuff up there to protect us from, from the other,
right,
whatever that was, and I have done concerts there. I just recently played in a giant abandoned metal water tank in Colorado that the sound artist had found, maybe 100 feet high, giant steel, big, huge water tank. And
Was it filled with water?
it was never filled with water because they had built it on a mound of dirt that they realized if they had filled it up with water, it would have crashed down. So they abandoned it like 40 years ago.
So they built this structure and never used it.
They never used it, and then it ended up being a hangout for teenagers. And eventually a sound artist found it, and so they invited me to do a similar concert inside the tank. And they also had a professional recording studio outside, and they also put up a Meyer sound system on the hills around it. So people could either hear the concert in the tank or outside. And I also worked with a lot of local drummers, and we did a piece by Pauline Oliveros where we actually, me and 6 other drummers played the tank,
Oh, cool.
doing this sort of single roll stroke meditation. So I do like playing in different spaces. And a couple years ago, for the Agnes Martin show at the Guggenheim Museum, John Zorn created a series of pieces for percussion, harp, and electronics that we did in honor of Agnes Martin. And in this really incredible, at the bottom, I don't know if you've been to the Guggenheim, but it kind of wraps around, and you're on the floor, and we had the music on the bottom, and it just sort of spread out. And John did a whole concert based on the sound and the acoustic of that room, doing a concert there. And I've done similar concerts like at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, at the Louvre. John did a concert here actually at the Chicago Art Institute, where he would play in different galleries with his favorite paintings.
Very cool. Yeah, that's really cool.
So yes, I'm always interested in that. I just did a thing at the Sutro Baths in San Francisco. I don't know if you know these. There used to be a giant outdoor swimming pool right on the ocean that got destroyed during the earthquake, but now it's sort of abandoned
Oh, wow.
quarries and stuff like that. And I did a piece for 90 drummers there by John Luther Adams outdoors. And I'm doing another thing with this First Nations composer is writing a piece for percussion to be played in this outdoor park.
So cool. Fantastic.
Great.
Wonderful.
And then just, I don't know if you knew, about 2 or 3 years ago, there was a tribute done to Pierre Boulez here.
Oh.
Chicago Symphony Orchestra did. It was really great.
I mean, you know, one of the first Varese records I ever bought was Arcana with George Solti and the Chicago Symphony. I mean, it was, you know, made in the 50s.
Yeah.
You know, when no one was playing Varese, and
Totally.
you know, Chicago Symphony, we're doing it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have a bunch of Varese records done, recorded by the Chicago Symphony. Chicago's always been like a hub for, I think, for new music. There was also a composer that wrote a lot of some pieces for me, named Ralph Shapey, who used to live, is from Chicago and taught at the University of Chicago. He was not only a great composer, but he was a very important person as a conductor and presenting a lot of new music to Chicago audiences. And he was a really interesting man. And so I worked with him.
Like circular loops or something like that? Loops? Something with the word loops in it?
You mean Ralph's?
Yeah.
He wrote all kinds of pieces, but he wrote a trio for me, and this trio I used to have in San Francisco, and he brought us out to the University of Chicago. We premiered this trio that he had written for us. But I'd worked with him before too, doing other pieces. And again, he also recorded a lot of this new music. So you could find it in the 60s, you could find these recorded that he made as a conductor, conducting, I guess, musicians from around here. But I felt like he was another really kind of a key figure in the new music scene here in Chicago.
Any more questions? Yep, Mike.
I'm really happy you played that James Tenney piece. I really love that. And I first heard it on that really great record that you put out. I forget who, someone on the East Coast, where it came in that amazing wooden box. You know?
Oh yeah. I'd never done a solo, even though all these composers over the years have written pieces for me. I never did a solo record under my own name, and it was always like, you know, Willie plays John Cage, or
Right.
Lou Harrison, or Roscoe Mitchell, or Braxton. You know, it was always like me playing other people's music, and the record would always be under their names. But then some woman from Boston called me up and said she would really like to do a record that would be under my name, and what pieces would I like to do, and blah blah blah. And I said, you know, well, okay, as long as I don't have to record, you know, maybe can I use recordings I did when I was in college, or, you know, can I give you cassettes and things like that, and then, you know, and the only piece that we actually recorded was that Jim Tenney piece.
Oh wow. Yeah, I've never heard of Jim Tenney before then, and I got really obsessed with that piece, and then it sent me down the rabbit hole of James Tenney, and I learned so much more about him. And then I really wanted to perform that piece, and I was having a hard time on the come down. And then I read something where he mentioned that everyone gets it wrong because they don't pace the come down well. And I was wondering how you deal with that one, because it's easy to like slowly build, but then after you build like.
Well, I have a stopwatch,
Okay.
and I kind of use the stopwatch as where I'm going to peak, and then using it also how to go down.
Okay.
So yeah, I use a stopwatch for it, and I've done it for a while. So yeah, that is the hardest part. I've always, the thing about that piece is that it wasn't written for Tam Tam. Jim Tenney wrote a series of pieces that he called postcard pieces, and they were pieces that he would write on a postcard for a friend, a performer, and then he would just put it in the mail and mail it to them. So this piece that he did was written for my teacher, and it was called, we didn't have the name of this piece is called Never Having Written a Note for Percussion. So this was his first percussion piece, and all it is I don't know if now we're going to get technical. It's a crescendo. I don't know if you know what that looks like in sheet music, but it's like a sideways V that goes like that, and then a decrescendo.
Don't forget the fermata though in the middle.
And then there's like a fermata in the middle, and then a whole note with a roll sign over it. So all he meant was he wrote a long roll that starts really quiet, gets really loud, and then gets real quiet again. So it was sort of my idea just to do it on Tam Tam. But I've done this piece, like I did it with a rock band. I did it with Sonic Youth. We did it with a whole band doing it.
Oh yeah. I heard that.
So it could be done on a drum. I did it with basically a noise band. So it can be done on any instrument.
Right. It's just I think on the postcard you kind of drew.
On the postcard, all it is a crescendo and a decrescendo with a roll, with a whole note, a roll in the middle with a fermata that says very
Could you
long.
maybe play it one more time for everybody? We've all got time, right? Maybe a longer version of it.
And he wrote a series of pieces. He wrote one for solo violin. He wrote one for Buell Neidlinger. I don't know if you guys, for the jazz guys here, Buell was like one of the first bass players that ever played with Cecil Taylor, but he was also the principal bass player of the Boston Symphony. He wrote a piece called Beast for him. He wrote one for Simone Forte, a dance piece. He wrote a harp one. And so he just made these on postcards, and then he would mail them. And then a little publishing company eventually duplicated them as postcards.
Yeah.
The only difference, some of them, the Tam Tam piece and the violin piece are what he calls koans. Yeah. And koan is a Buddhist term, meaning like it's a question without an answer. And so this was part of that series. Like this, one hand, the sound of one hand shaking,
right.
or something. I don't know. It's some. I'm not a scholar, and I'm certainly not a Buddhist, but it has something to. It doesn't make sense. You ponder a question that has no answer, and by pondering it for a long time, you achieve some sort of understanding, nirvana. You achieve something. I don't know what, but it's something.
I'm still trying to figure it out.
You know what I mean? Yeah. You know what I mean?
I literally, I had like synesthesia going on in the middle of that piece. Seriously, it's like purple. It's what? Purple thing just hit me. Yeah.
It's a beautiful piece and a simple idea.
Beautiful idea.
Was that amplified in any way? Was it
No.
going through speakers? Okay, wow, that was great, amazing.
Okay, any other questions for Mr. Winant? Okay, how about a round of applause? One more round of applause. Thank you, William. Thanks for your support, everybody. The series runs through the end of October. Next week, Darren Gray, amazing bass player, played with Jim O'Rourke, lots of other people, super great. It's going to play solo, and I'm going to interview him, so definitely come back. Because each time I do these interviews, I get a little bit less nervous. So I'm just going to keep going with them, and we'll see what happens. Maybe I'll just be an interviewer the rest of my life. It'll be fine. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.
Thank you.